the rules of the National Chancellor, it says there's a section, process for member discipline by the chapter. That's you. Now, there are a lot of words in this document. There are a lot of A, B, C, D, E's, and F's in the outline. But believe it or not, this has been written to make it very simple. You need to tell them the time of the hearing, the place of the hearing, and the date of the hearing. And that's and some sense of why they're being called in front of the J board. It doesn't have to go into great detail. It just says you've been accused of X, Y, and Z, or it's been alleged that you have violated the chapter's bylaws, or have done something that's prejudicial to the chapter. And so therefore we're holding a hearing on this date, at this time, at this place, and you can choose to be there. If you choose not to be there as the accused, that's fine. We're going to hold the hearing anyway. Let's introduce the mock judicial board. So I'm the moderator, and as I say, I'm going to jump in from time to time. The chapter president is Ray. The vice president is Jack. Chaplain is Nick. Treasurer is Leighton. The secretary is Jacob. The senior on the board is Hunter. Junior is Andres. The sophomore is Rick. And the freshman is Levi. And the accused in this scenario is Brian. Ray and Jack have just come back from the president's retreat. This is a discussion about Brian's behavior. Go.
Hey man, did you hear about Brian?
No. What happened?
Yeah, so it looks like there was an issue while we were away this weekend. Brian was telling me that his girlfriend broke up with him Saturday, and so he started drinking around noon because he was really pissed off.
Was he drinking in the house? He knows we're a substance-free facility, right?
Yes, but it gets worse though. Looks like after he had already had a ton to drink at the house, he got in his car and drove downtown to the bars. He was out and was buying shots for everybody there for about 2 hours before he drove back.
Great. Really smart.
Oh, it gets even better. When he got back to the house, there were a bunch of the freshmen watching a movie in the chapter room, right? And he forced them to go outside and do push-ups on the lawn.
Okay, we got to do something. Sounds like judicial board should probably decide on this. So let's get everybody together.
Okay, so a quick recap. Brian was upset about his girlfriend breaking up with him, so he drank at the substance-free house. That's a problem. Drove to the bar. Problem. Bought shots for everyone else, then drove back and hazed the freshman. Problem. President found out and instructed the J board to handle the issue. So that's the first highlight. So the J board, whoever finds out, probably is going to tell the president, right? The president's response in this situation is throw it to the J board, which the chairman of the J board is vice president. Let the J board handle it. Start the process, which begins with an investigation. Let me point out, in addition to the 4 top officers, there's a delegate present from each class. Remember, I talked about the J board needs to be respected in the chapter. An easy way to make sure that you're doing that is have a delegate from each class sitting on the J board to be a part of the discussion. Okay, so with that, go ahead.
All right, everybody make sure your cameras are on. Okay. Our next order of business is judicial board. National says it's really important to have a working J board. I guess we've been doing a little wrong in the past, so we're going to change it up this year.
Yeah, so the vice president is the chairman, and each of us serves on the judicial board. We also need to appoint 4 other guys, 1 from each class, so we get a good representation from the chapter.
Can't we just use, the other 4 guys from exec? It'd be easier for us in the long run. And I'd say, all 9 of us are pretty level-headed and responsible in running the J board.
No, we don't want to overlap that too much, so we don't blur the lines of what each board is for.
Shouldn't we just let the chapter vote on the other officers like they do for exec positions?
No, we appoint them as the 4 elected members. We want them to keep the general chapter separate from most judicial affairs.
Okay, so how about we have Hunter and Andreas for senior and junior reps. They've been on J board before, so they're going to be familiar with all the procedures of J board and how it runs.
How about Levi and Rick for freshman and sophomore reps? They're pretty level-headed. Let's take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. We'll announce this at our next chapter meeting.
Okay, so I'll edit this out. Go ahead and just skip to the next part because I did the moderator part ahead of where I was supposed to do it.
All right, everybody camera on. Okay, so to review, Brian was drinking in our substance-free house, drove drunk to the bars, bought everyone shots, including some underage brothers, drunk drove back to the house, and hazed some freshmen. Do you guys feel like these allegations have merit?
Yes.
Okay.
We need to figure out when we can meet. We need to have at least 3 business days in between today and when we actually do the meeting.
Can we just meet tomorrow? Might as well get it over with.
No, we need to give them at least 3 business days notice before the hearing. How about Friday afternoon at 3 in the chapter room?
Yeah, sounds good. Can you also copy our BOT chair on the email so he's in the loop?
Sure.
Okay, a couple of things here. I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning of this. Number one, you heard Ray say, can you copy the Board of Trustees chairman on this so he knows what's going on? So that this is the time, once the J board has decided that the allegations have merit, you definitely need to bring your BOT into the mix. Now, the BOT chairman may say, oh my gosh, do we need to do anything as a BOT? And the president can handle this, or the vice president, it really doesn't matter. But the answer is no, not right now. We're handling it. Let us do our job. Sometimes the BOT will say, hey, can I sit in, or I should sit in on the hearing. And normally that wouldn't be a problem. But the reason it would be in this case is because there's a chance that the BOT will hear the appeal. So it's important that the BOT not sit in on the hearing. The notice, it can be an email, it can be a text, it can be a handwritten note, it can be a letter. It doesn't really matter, but it needs to be written, right, electronically or on paper. It needs to include the allegations, broadly speaking, the date, time, and place of the hearing. And if it's a Zoom conference, you're going to say, hey, I'll send you a link, or the link can be in the email allegation with the, here's the link, click on this link to join the Zoom meeting. The fact that it will be a J board hearing, the J board has met and decided these allegations are worth talking about. And the fact that Brian can be present, but if he chooses not to be, that's up to him, but the J board hearing will continue anyway. He is not required to be present. Now, of course, it's highly preferable that Brian is present, right? You don't want the J board to try to manipulate it so Brian isn't present, and the hearing needs to be at a reasonable hour. Like, so saying we're gonna have the J board meeting at 3 a.m., 3 business days from now, hopefully Brian won't want to come, right? This is obvious, right? This is all common sense. You don't want to do that, right? If Brian wants to be at the hearing, Brian needs to have the opportunity to be at the hearing and state his case. Okay, so with that, we're going back to the simulation.
All right, Brian, before we start, since we're doing this virtually, can you please confirm that you're by yourself and that nobody's listening off screen and that you're not recording this hearing?
Yeah, man, it's just me. My dad, he's on standby downstairs. He's a lawyer, so if this gets like hostile or whatever, he's gonna come in and represent me. And I'm gonna record this because I want to make sure y'all aren't like doing anything shady, so I can show it to him afterwards just to make sure.
Nope, no one will be recording this hearing, and this judicial board is for you, not your dad. He's welcome to talk to the board after the hearing is over, but he's not allowed to while this is going on.
Okay, there are a couple of really important points that you need to hear and absorb as it relates to J boards. Number one, ATO is a private organization. Your chapter, as a chapter of Alpha Tau Omega, is a private organization. There is no due process as it relates to what the government, if you're in a criminal trial or a civil trial, due process as the government defines it is not the same due process ATO defines it. ATO's due process is what we're going through right now. Our due process does not guarantee a lawyer be present. In fact, we say no. We do not want a lawyer present in this, and it's perfectly acceptable. Now, sometimes, especially if a dad or a mom is an attorney, they will try to do exactly what Brian just said. Hey, my dad or my mom's an attorney. They want to listen in. No, you have to be very firm to say no. That is not acceptable in this process. And if they bluster or rattle sabers or we're going to sue or whatnot, just hold your ground and say, just like Jack did, hey, we're happy to talk with you if Brian wants us to talk with you after the hearing. Happy to do that, but you being part of the hearing is not going to happen. And they have no choice, right? The other thing that I would suggest, and this is something that we have learned from past, especially in a Zoom thing, one thing you may want to do, especially if Brian's saying, hey, my dad wants to record this, is, okay, let's make sure dad is not in the room. And so you might want to have Brian turn his computer in a 360 to show the room to make sure he's in the room by himself. Brian may say, I have an attorney and he's going to sue. Okay, but he's not going to be part of this hearing, right? And so again, there can be a lot of bluster going on. And generally speaking, J-Board needs to hold its ground. Follow these rules, which are easy to follow, and you'll be good. Okay, go ahead.
All right, Brian, before we get started, do you know where your badge and certificate are currently?
Yeah, I got them here. That was kind of weird you asked for that in the email, but I dug it out of my box of freshman year crap.
Okay. Brian, you're here because you violated a number of chapter bylaws by drinking in a substance-free house, driving drunk to the bars, buying shots for everyone there, including some underage brothers, drunk driving back to the house, and hazing some freshmen.
Yeah, so sure. Was pretty upset. I mean, my girlfriend and I broke up, so was kind of upset, having a rough day. So I feel like I should kind of get a pass on some of this stuff. But some of the boys were going out, me and the senior class, we were hitting up the bars. Maybe I went a little too hard, whatever, but I don't think it's really that big a deal. Buying people shots, whatever, wasn't a chapter event, wasn't chapter money. So you can't tell me what to do. Hazing the freshmen, I made him do push-ups. Boo-hoo. Hunter, when we went through pledging, ours was much worse. I mean, you guys have soft pledging now, so not a big deal. Sorry, I did it. Whatever. But come on.
Okay, does anybody on the board have any questions for Brian?
Yeah, I have something I wanted to bring up. Brian, I mean, you were drinking in the house, and our house is substance free. We've gotten bopped for that before and been suspended. We could potentially get kicked off for that. And that you drove back from the bars, man, you must have been wasted. That's just, you could have hurt someone, yourself, or got in trouble. It would have been terrible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't, so everything ended up being fine. I mean, so, drank in the house, boohoo. I had a couple beers in my room, had a couple shots before I got in the car. Not a big deal. It's a straight shot down to the bars on a main road. So well lit, a lot of stoplights. So it's fine. Nothing happened. I don't get it. It's fine.
I'm also curious. So you owe us $213. So I'm kind of confused how you were able to buy shots for everyone at the bar, really, and you still haven't been able to pay dues yet.
Well, I'm only paying for stuff that happens, and so we haven't had any socials this year or anything like that. So I'm not gonna pay the chapter if the chapter's not doing stuff. I'm gonna make my own socials, right? So I made a brotherhood event out of nothing, so I feel like I should be getting a budget from the chapter for that.
Even though we're not having any socials, Brian, something I definitely want to bring up is we're still having brotherhood events. Not everything has to center around alcohol. You haven't been to one single brotherhood event. You haven't participated in any other chapter event that we've had this year. You didn't even come to initiation, and your little brother was being initiated. So it's, what do you have anything to say for yourself? Like, you also mentioned that you found your pin and your certificate in freshman year crap. So it's just really hard to show kind of where you're at right now with ATO. Do you have anything to say about you not attending any of those?
Yeah, kind of feels like I'm being attacked right now. Yeah, I don't come to brotherhood events because like they're not fun. Because every time I show up, like I showed up to one in the fall and everyone was like, "Oh, Brian's finally here. Like you never show up to things, right?" Like y'all are kind of jerks about it. So again, me and the boy, like we made a brotherhood event. Me and the boys went out to the bar, made our own brotherhood event because y'all do soft brotherhood, and it sucks. I'm like, initiation, come on, like initiation. What are we gonna do it at like 7 p.m. on a Sunday? Ooh, that's no fun. Come on, I'm busy that day.
Well, Brian, at the end of the day, we're just trying to help you in the chapter. So you did haze the pledges at the end of the day, and your attendance has been lacking. So we're just trying to help figure out how we can best help you as a brother and the chapter overall.
Yeah, well, okay, so again, like haze the pledges. I made them do push-ups, right? Like they need to be physically fit. That's something that's important to us here. Otherwise, women will not be attracted to them. Like the sororities aren't going to want to hang out with us if we don't have ripped pledges. Everybody knows that. And again, like if y'all are all about, brotherhood, whatever, like I'm not showing up to stuff because y'all suck at brotherhood. Like this is not a good brotherhood right now.
Okay, Brian, bro, what about like the chapter's image, how your actions represent all of us?
Yeah, represent us being like cool as heck, baby. Like having a hard pledgeship again. Like again, way better than the soft stuff you guys are doing now. Like getting being like the #1 dude at the bars. Like everybody was like, yeah, ATO rocks. Brian is being so cool, like buying us shots and stuff like that. Like I am the reason that we have a good reputation on campus, right? Because I am cool, unlike you guys who are definitively not.
Okay, Brian, we've been asking you a lot of questions. Do you have anything else to say or testify in your defense?
No, I really don't feel like there's a whole lot to defend. So no, I think we're good.
Okay. And he left. All right, guys, we just heard from Brian. So now we're going to vote on whether we think that he's guilty or not. So all in favor of him being guilty, raise your hand. Okay, unanimous. So guilty. So now let's talk about his punishment.
Okay, so let me jump in here for a few things. You'll notice that the J board first decided guilt or innocence, guilt or not guilty. And that's before any talk of punishment or sanction or anything like that, right? So don't allow the J board to get those topics mixed up because it makes it harder to have a discussion. The first discussion, the first focus is on guilt or not guilty. The other thing, even though we have the accused member with his camera turned off, clearly you want him to leave the meeting altogether. So he needs to log out. A couple of other things. Brian was asked to bring his badge and certificate to the meeting. Why? Well, because if the J board decides to expel him, we're going to want those back, right? Because he's no longer a member. He doesn't need a badge or certificate. If he's not expelled, okay, no harm, no foul, right? Okay, great. But it's easier to have them bring it up front. Plus, it demonstrates very vividly, hey, this is important. The J board asked specific and pointed questions about the allegations, but they also talked about some other things that Brian had been doing related to not showing up for brotherhood events and stuff like that. That's perfectly fine. Again, ATO's due process is you can bring other issues up if Brian is perhaps demonstrating conduct prejudicial to the chapter and to ATO. That's fine. It can come in even though those weren't listed as allegations. There's no rule that says if it wasn't listed, we can't talk about it. You can talk about anything as it relates to Brian's behavior. Even when Brian got upset, the J board kept its cool. And so regardless of how someone responds, and certainly there have been times when guys get really upset, and threaten or cry or whatever. The J board just needs to keep calm. In the end, Brian tried to play the bro card, which is very common, right? How can you be good brothers to me and do this? This is not brotherhood. And the easiest way to deal with that is turn that right around. Hey, Brian, what you were doing clearly violates chapter policy. How is that being a good brother? It seems to me that if anyone's talking about not being a good brother, this is why you're in front of the J board. We didn't demonstrate it here, but if Brian has witnesses to defend him, well, Brian really didn't buy shots at the bar, and I was with him, and I can say that. Brian has the opportunity to say, hey, I want to bring someone in to talk to you. The J board can hear those witnesses after it talks to Brian. Those folks need to stay outside of the room or off the Zoom call until you invite them in after you've talked to Brian. And Brian can be in there too if he wants to say, hey, tell him what you saw at the bar. And if you want to dismiss Brian to ask a witness more questions, that's fine. Again, you're in charge. If Brian says, I've got 25 witnesses, you don't have to hear 25 witnesses. You can decide we're going to hear 3, or we're going to hear 1, or we're going to hear 5, or you know what, we're not going to hear any. Now, I don't recommend not hearing any if Brian's got witnesses, but just because he has X number, you don't have to comply with that number. You as a J board can bring in witnesses if you want to. So if someone is at the bar and saw Brian, act the fool, if you want to bring them in so that everyone on the J board can hear this, that's your prerogative also. You don't have to do that. But again, you can do that. In terms of outcomes, a whole continuum is available. You can vote to do nothing at all the way to expulsion. We're going to model what it would look like if the chapter allowed Brian to keep his membership, and then we're going to do it again to show you what it would look like to expel him.
All right, so after hearing from Brian and just kind of hearing from you guys asking questions, it's very evident that he's damaging the image of the chapter, and he's been a rather apathetic senior, and just being a senior is no excuse for his apathy and poor attendance and lack of paying dues. So I propose the following sanctions of attending the alcohol awareness class on campus once a month, not attending any chapter function where money comes out of pocket, especially not until he pays off what he owes to us. Being a sober participant at social events, not a sober monitor, but someone who participates in the event while remaining sober. How does that sound to you guys?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Addresses everything and hopefully puts him in a better place as a person.
Great. Let's vote. All in favor, raise your hand. All right, so unanimous. Jacob, make sure that you write that down in the minutes of how the vote went.
Okay, one quick note here, and notice everyone voted except the vice president. The vice president only votes in case there is a tie. So now we'll go over what the process looks like from here, but first we're going to go back and show you what an expulsion would look like.
All right, guys, so I propose the following sanctions. Same thing, alcohol awareness class on campus once a month, not attending any chapter function where money comes out of pocket, especially not until he at least pays off what he owes to us. Being a sober participant at social events, not a sober monitor, just a sober participant at our events. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. It addresses everything and puts him in a better place, hopefully.
Great. Let's vote. All those in favor, raise your hands. Okay.
I think he needs to be expelled. He did a lot of stuff, hasn't been a good brother for a long time, and doesn't seem to regret what he did. I don't want someone like that representing me.
Okay.
I mean, he's a senior. We shouldn't kick him out. I mean, he's literally going to graduate here in a few months. There's no point to it.
I mean, there's still expectations that, we all agreed upon when we joined the chapter. Just because he's a senior doesn't mean he doesn't have any expectations. This wouldn't be okay if it was a freshman or sophomore. So why should it be okay, for a senior?
All right, so I'm hearing that we want to vote for expulsion. So all in favor of those for expelling Brian? Raise your hand. All right, That's more than 2/3. Expulsion passes. Jacob, make sure that that expulsion vote and the guilty, not guilty vote is expressed in those minutes.
Okay, so a couple of notes here. The secretary who is recording this, as Jack just mentioned, you want to record less, not more. And what's that mean? The date, the time, and the location of the hearing, the charges against him, whether or not he was found guilty of those charges, and if it was an expulsion, if it was a simple majority or an expulsion, 2/3, right? The sanctions, if not expulsion, what the sanctions were, including the due dates and secondary sanctions, if there are any. So, for example, the sanction could be, Brian, we want you to go to rehab, and here are some suggestions, and then we need to see within 6 weeks that you did this. And if you don't do this, then we're going to expel you, or we're going to come back again as a J board and determine and vote to whether we're going to expel you or not, right? So there do this, and we're good. If you don't do it, then we're going to convene again and see why not, right? So if you do that as a J board, just keep in mind, the more complicated you make sanctions, the more that you've got to be very cognizant of the need for you to follow up. Because if you do this, so Brian, go to rehab, and then Brian doesn't go to rehab, and the J board sort of forgets about it, and it's like, oh, it's a pain to get back together. Brian's doing better now. Let's just forget it. Okay, that is an immediate way that the J board loses its credibility with the chapter, right? So the more complicated you make sanctions, which is totally your jurisdiction, right? But the more complicated you make sanctions, it just means the more work that you need to do to make sure that things are being followed up correctly. The secretary does not, in fact, should not, please do not record the discussion, who said what, Brian got upset, or that does not need to be recorded anywhere. There's no reason to it. You're not taking a transcript of this hearing. The vice president has 5 business days, right? So 3 business days to give the accused notice of the hearing, 5 business days for the vice president from the date of the hearing to notify the accused of the outcome. It could be that night or that day. It doesn't have to be 5 days. You've got up to 5 days, right? And I think most J boards probably just make a decision, and then the vice president just emails. Again, it needs to be written electronically or on paper, so that there's a record of it. But you could do it, the vice president could do it immediately after the J board dismisses. The email must include that the board found the allegations were true, and what the sanctions are, and the appeals process, which basically says you have 5 business, you accused Brian, you have 5 business days to appeal to the Board of Trustees or the National Fraternity. If you want to, you don't have to, right? Okay. This should be copied to the Board of Trustees and your leadership consultant. If Brian appeals, the vice president should email the secretary's notes along with a copy of the original notice and the sanction notice to whoever the appealing agency is, which is typically the BOT. So it'd go to the BOT. If it's in the National Fraternity, you can forward that to your leadership consultant, and eventually it's going to hit my desk. In the old days, a J board would act, and the chapter, in some cases, would vote to reverse the J board's decision because the appeal process went through the chapter. And the chapter, not having the benefit of the hearing, a lot of emotions get involved. It's how popular is Brian, that kind of thing. And it becomes a popularity contest in many cases. The chapter would vote to let him back in. And it totally pulls the rug out from under the J board. And again, the J board then becomes a paper tiger. A number of years ago, we changed the rules of the National Chancellor. The chapter as a body has no role in this process, in the judicial process of a chapter whatsoever. At no time does a chapter gather to vote on anything the J board does. A couple other things. If there's a sexual assault accusation accused, this gets tricky very quickly for obvious reasons. The chapter should never attempt to investigate sexual assault itself. The woman should not be approached, right? You should let your leadership consultant know right away. We have protocols here that we will engage and start having conversations with the chapter president immediately about this, but this gets kicked up very quickly because another person is involved, a victim potentially, and depending on who, if the chapter handles it or tries to handle it through an investigation, in many cases it can make the situation worse for the alleged victim because the chapter hasn't ever dealt with this kind of thing before. We have, right? And so we know the protocols, and certainly we will engage the chapter president to have conversations. Okay, here are the next steps, kind of thing, right? So kick it up to your consultant immediately. Don't try to investigate it yourself. Certainly contacting the victim of a sexual assault or alleged sexual assault about the incident has the potential to cause unintentional harm. And it's really important to kick that to the leadership consultant immediately. One other note, and this is an issue that came up in the last year, and I think this is important for J boards to know. A chapter did the right thing in terms of an actual pledge being hazed and called a J board and actually kicked a few members out who were directly involved with that. Okay, so that piece of it, the chapter did the right thing, right? Trying to do the right thing, did the right thing, holding these guys accountable, kicked them out. The problem was that before all of this, there was all kinds of crazy going on as it relates to some of the officers trying to use the J board as sort of a battering ram against the people they didn't like in the chapter. Well, guess what? Some of those folks who were sort of targeted by the J board for reasons that had nothing to do with breaking the rules, some of those folks are also the same folks that actually did break the rules and hazed the pledges. And so when the J board then tried to act in good faith and kick those guys out, it's like, well, you just wanted to kick me out because you don't like me anyway, and you've been trying to get me blah, blah, blah. Okay, now we have a problem. Do not use the J board or let anyone on your J board, frankly, hey, I'm on the J board, so if you piss me off, I'm gonna get the J board to meet. You can't have guys be talking like that because, again, you could find yourself in a situation where people don't take the J board seriously, or in the case that I just described, someone who really did something wrong gets expelled or sanctioned, and they're like, well, that's crazy. I'm going to call my dad, and he's going to come down here and raise hell because you're just trying to get rid of me. And guess what? They were before, right? And so it's a problem. So you've got to be cognizant of how important this body is. Let's see, there's a sample chapter bylaws for J board in your binder. There's a sample code of conduct in your binder. There's a quick process and frequently asked questions in your binder. And again, the rules of the National Chancellor are the last section in your governing docs, like the goldenrod section.
Can you talk a little bit about what happens if something major happens and the chapter is like, we need to do an emergency J board before the 3 days notice or whatever. So like, we have to do something today. Can you talk about the alternatives to, okay, you can't do it within 3 days, so what do you then do?
Yeah, so in the governing documents, and we'll go over this in terms of the authority as the president, you as president have authority to suspend immediately, unilaterally. You don't have to get permission from the exec board, the board of trustees, the national fraternity, or anybody else. You have that authority, unilaterally can suspend a member temporarily while an investigation is in pursuit. And so if it is a serious issue, potential sexual assault, hazing, those are the two big ones. That member or members should be suspended immediately, temporarily, and then let the J board do its thing. So that pulls them out of the process. You don't want the university to come back and said, you knew that this was happening, you didn't do anything. Well, we had a J board like 3 business days later. Yeah, but well, yes, we did. We suspended his membership. And president, you can do that unilaterally.